So as we mentioned this week, we passed International Women's Day. And this is an effort on the part of the United Nations. It recognizes the achievements and the challenges of women around the world. This year, the theme is Embrace Equity. And the description invites us to, and I quote, imagine a gender equal world. A world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination. A world that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive. A world where difference is valued and celebrated, that asks people to join to forge women's equality and to embrace equity. With so many challenges that are facing women around the world, I think it is crucial that we center this message in our worship. And there are, of course, many different directions that we could go today, including the economic needs of women in different parts of the world, the gender oppression that is still structured and upheld in the legal systems of many countries, the struggles that Afghani women have been facing this year, which are staggering and heartbreaking. And then it's not all bad news either. There is good news. There are the accomplishments, the uplifting stories, the ways that women have fought to overcome challenges to institutional sexism and educational exclusion, and the dramatic changes wrought by the climate emergency. But what this International Women's Day did for me was something a little bit different. It got me thinking about some of the conversations that are happening in the media here in the United States and in other parts of the world. And then to wonder about a possible liberal religious response to those messages. And I'm grateful for my colleague Jim Rigby, who helped me to make some of these connections that I'm going to draw today. When I was in college, one of the most important classes that I ever took was feminist theory. It was an advanced course in the philosophy department. And a significant part of that class was dedicated to asking the question, what is a woman? Feminist theory has a long and rich history of answering that question. As a branch of critical philosophy, it takes sex and gender not simply as biological givens, and instead it understands them as socially defined. Simple biological answers to the questions, what is race, what is gender, what is homosexuality, often obscure power dynamics rather than illuminate them. They treat those questions as easy and straightforward. And so it takes effort, it takes thought to peel back the layers, to realize the relations of power that shape our everyday understanding of those concepts. This morning, we offered a reading from Genesis. Here, God creates Adam and Eve, and in many ways, this text is the template for the social definition of what a woman is. And it is a strange story. Eve is created from the rib of Adam. We, of course, know that that is not how things come about. Men are not born from women. And then Eve is called Adam's helper, his helper, defining her in subordinate relation to him. And then the scripture goes even further than this. It says, because of this template where woman is defined by her relationship to a man, this is why marriage occurs. Woman's definition, subordination, and attachment to man is ordained in this passage. Now, I'm going to return to Eve in a bit because I would kind of like to liberate her from this circumstance, but I'll get to that. But first, I was curious to see how the dictionary answers this question of what is a woman. Merriam-Webster defines a woman as an adult female human being, which is a somewhat circular way of answering that question. But then it gives synonyms that get us terribly close to the Eve situation. wife, mistress, girlfriend. Even Webster's dictionary assumes that a woman is defined in terms of her relationship to a male. Now, it can be easy to forget that we are not so far out from a time when society made this much more obvious in terms of its basic structuring. Women could not open credit cards without the permission of their husband. States rejected the idea of marital rape as a possible concept. A man could have his wife committed to an institution if she was disobedient to him. The number of professions that were available to women were exceedingly small, thus forcing her to be dependent upon a male partner. I could go on and on with that list, but I will leave it there. But the idea that women are defined by their relationship to men has entailed concrete power relationships that have disadvantaged women. Right now, there is a flourishing moment on the political right that organizes itself around the question, what is a woman? Now, I'm not suggesting that you do this, but if you were to type that question into Google, you would immediately get documentaries and YouTube clips and books by figures on the conservative right. And they often film themselves going up to random people on the street and asking that question, what is a woman? And then when someone who is progressive or liberal tries to answer that question with any kind of nuance, allowing space for self-definition or complexity, the conservative commentators shriek with laughter. His assumption, and I say he very intentionally here because most of these conservative commentators who are doing this are men, is that being a woman is a simple, obvious biological reality. We should all get that. We should all understand that, right? It means having a womb. Listen to how stupid these progressives are that they don't get that they don't understand that they think that gender might be something more complicated than that simple biological reality. And of course, the big point here to this argument is obviously to discredit transgender and non-binary people, to try to erase them from the very possibility of existence in the social world. If I have learned anything from feminist theory, it is that you should never trust people in power to define those who are not in power. Because usually this covers over all sorts of assumptions that disadvantage those marginalized groups. And I am reminded here of the feminist theorist Simone de Beauvoir. She was one of the pioneers in feminist theory. And her book, The Second Sex, in that book she writes, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. And the title of her book, The Second Sex, gives a clue for how society imagines that one becomes a woman. It is someone who comes second, who comes into a subordinate position to men, who is inferior to man. As Beauvoir puts it, legislators, priests, philosophers, writers, and scientists have striven to show that the subordinate position of woman is willed in heaven and advantageous on earth. The people producing the "what is a woman" content on social media pretend that they have a simple definition, a biological definition. A woman is someone who has the physical makeup of a biological female. But once you scratch the surface of what they are doing, you see that this isn't what their point is at all. Instead, you find a host of assumptions about natural qualities and subordinate roles that women will take. Almost all of these commentators present women as naturally happiest when they are in traditional social roles, not working, raising children, often in heterosexual marriages. Sometimes the ideal time in their head for when we understood what a woman was the 1950s. Sometimes it's the 1850s. It really depends on which side of the bed they woke up on that morning. In any case, their enthusiasm for winding back the clock on women's rights, on their ability to work, to get education, to have reproductive freedoms, it's barely containable. It's just beneath the surface of their argument. Now, people are noticing more and more energy being put into anti-transgender legislation. It's hard to miss it. 120 bills have been presented that seek to limit trans and queer rights. The Conservative Political Action Committee met last week and all but called for the public erasure of transgender people. Books featuring transgender characters have been banned from schools, and this genre of video, this social commentary of what is a woman, neatly fits within this category of anti-trans rhetoric. By presenting gender as obvious and given and biological, the arguments that trans people are delusional is right there. It's right under the surface, and it seeks to eliminate a space in which transgender people can flourish. But it's also important to notice that the same rhetoric that is anti-transgender is not simply anti-trans and anti-queer. It is also anti-feminist. It can barely contain its excitement for winding back the clock on women's rights. Almost to a person, these commentators who make these videos about what is a woman don't seek simply to make that biological point. They want to prove that biology is destiny. They happily share their fantasies of a world in which women are subordinate to men. Many of them yearn for this time when women are neatly tucked back inside the home. They yearn for a time when women are confined to heterosexual marriages only, where divorce is illegal, where courts did not believe women about sexual assault, where reproductive rights were all but unthought of, where having children was the limit of a woman's horizon. By pretending that gender is simply biological reality and not a social construction, they seek to paper over the unequal power differences at the heart of gender. It's disingenuous and it's ignorant, and it's time that people start calling a spade a spade. Religion has too often been the handmaid of gender oppression. It is one of the worst institutions for supporting and enforcing gender inequality. And so it is crucial that feminists and their allies and progressive denominations take an unapologetic stance. I think it's time that we liberate Eve. And so I'm going to give the last word to a feminist poet. Her name is Ansel Elkins. This is called The Autobiography of Eve. Wearing nothing but snakeskin boots, she blazed a footpath, the first radical road out of that old kingdom towards a new unknown. When she came to those great flaming gates of burning gold, she stood alone in terror at the threshold between paradise and earth. And that's when she heard a mysterious echo. It was her own voice, singing from across the forbidden side. She shook awake, at once alive in a blaze of green fire. Let it be known, she did not fall from grace. She leapt to freedom.